The 2025 season is in the books, the playoff is set, and the 5 seed is a really good spot to be in. Welcome in, everybody, to another episode of the Soder Report. My name is Kyle Soder. I'm the host here on the channel. Thank you all for tuning in. We're going to be talking about Oregon today. We're going to be going over the playoff bracket. The official playoff bracket is out. Oregon is the number 5 seed. They'll have a matchup with James Madison University, of all people. We're going to get into it more, as well as some of the outlook, things to be watching for. But first, please hit that like button, subscribe to the channel for more Oregon Ducks content. All right, so the playoff bracket is in place. Let me just pull it up right here for you guys. Oregon is sitting right here at number 5 against James Madison University. That's going to be December 20th at 4:30 p.m. Pacific time. That's going to take place at Autzen Stadium as well, so we get a home playoff game. Also, if they win that game, they'll go on to play Texas Tech, and then if they advance past Texas Tech, they'll play either Alabama, Oklahoma, or get another shot at Indiana. So let's just talk about Oregon's path here. Obviously, James Madison, that's going to be a good warm-up game. James Madison shouldn't really pose that much of a threat. That should be a game where Oregon can get their feet under them again, get the rust off, and go into a game against Texas Tech really prepared, as opposed to last year, events that I do not want to dwell on. I just refer to it as the New Year's Massacre. That will not be happening this year. Oregon will be the beneficiary of a flawed playoff format. So, assuming they just take care of business and beat James Madison, they're going to go on and play Texas Tech. Now, this one's interesting because Texas Tech, obviously they played on Saturday, December 6th. This game will take place on January 1st. So Texas Tech is in the Oregon spot last year. They will not have played a game for almost a month. For Oregon, this place is going to take place in Miami, Florida, and it's going to take place at 9 a.m. Pacific time. So it's going to be an early body clock game all the way across the country against a really good team, however, a team that might have some rust. So we probably don't get either team's best game. Texas Tech is a really good team. They're a legit national championship contender. And Oregon is as well. So that's going to be interesting to see how that plays out. Does Texas Tech handle the almost month layoff? Or does Oregon get themselves up early and ready for an early body clock game? The Northwestern game, that was not Oregon's best game, and that was their only early body clock game. So that's going to be an interesting one to see how that plays out. And then if they do get past Texas Tech, they'll go on to the playoff semifinals, which will be 4:30 Pacific time, but it'll be in Atlanta, Georgia. So the entire, how do I want to say this? Oregon's travel schedule is not going to be super friendly to them over these next couple weeks. That's probably the farthest anyone in this entire bracket is going to be traveling. From Eugene to Miami, back to Eugene to Atlanta. That's going to be a lot. Now they do have extra time. This is going to be 8 days later, so they get an extra day of rest. And then the national championship will be 10 days later, as you can see here, and it's going to be in Miami again. So that's going to be another thing that Oregon's going to have to figure out, is navigating all of that travel. Going from Eugene to Miami, if you win, going back to Atlanta, and then if you win, going back to Miami again. So you have the extra time in between games. That'll help out a little bit. But it will be interesting to see how that gets navigated. So I talked a little bit about this. I touched on it a little bit in the last episode that we did. But there are a lot of teams that are really upset about being left out. Namely Notre Dame. That's the biggest one. But also BYU, Vanderbilt a little bit. Those teams aren't too happy about being left out. Vanderbilt even tried to sue to be let in the college football playoff. And you can look at resumes and you can go to different statistical outlets to find reasons why each of these teams should be in the college football playoff. And a lot of teams point to JMU and Tulane and say, those guys don't deserve a spot in the playoff. Notre Dame and BYU should be in. Well, and my answer to that is, well, the reasoning to that is because they're supposed to be better games. They're better teams. Oregon's just going to blow JMU out. So put Notre Dame in, put BYU in. And that puzzles me because BYU just lost by 26 to Texas Tech, who's a very good team. But if you're going to say that these teams don't deserve to be in because they're going to get blown out, BYU's going to get blown out too by Oregon. And I know a lot of BYU fans don't want to hear that. We who engage in Oregon Twitter know all about BYU fans trying to say that BYU would beat Oregon because they did it in the 2003 Holiday Bowl. I've actually heard that conversation take place on Twitter. I couldn't believe it. But if the argument for saying that we should let teams 11 and 12 in is because they're going to be better games, they're really not. BYU doesn't really deserve a place in a 12. Just like how I put it last time. The purpose of the college football playoff bracket is first and foremost to make money, but within that parameter, the overall goal of this bracket is to crown a national champion. Notre Dame has lost to the only two good teams they've played. BYU has been blown out twice by the only national championship contending team they've played. So if we're talking about crowning a national championship, a national champion, and putting in teams that deserve to be in the playoff, well, in my opinion, the only teams that deserve to be in the playoff competing for a national championship right now, really it's 1 through 7 in this bracket. Like, I don't think Oklahoma's a real national championship contender. I don't think Alabama's a real national championship contender. I don't think Miami is. I don't think Tulane is. And I don't think James Madison is. So, all of this to say, like, we're trying to use Notre Dame and BYU as an excuse to expand the playoff bracket even more. I don't think that that's the case. I think that we fit in every national championship contender. And secondly, I think that this is right. The process was bad. Notre Dame shouldn't have been ranked as high as they were for as long as they were. I think Miami should have been above them the whole time. And no, BYU didn't deserve a place in the bracket. They're not a real contender. So you can say that with Miami, you can say that with Tulane, you can say that with Alabama. So the only difference in those bubble teams getting left out and left in, aside from the opportunity to go to Eugene, Oregon and get blown out just like JMU is going to, is that their conferences are missing out on an extra paycheck. That's really the only difference. So, all of this to say, the teams that deserve to be in and competing for a national championship, that's seeds 1 through 7, they're in. And then the rest, the bubble teams and stuff, the G5s, like, sort of who cares? They're not going to actually compete for a national title. So that's where I stand on it. I talked about it in my last episode. So you can go and check out more of what I said if you would like. But that's where I come down, is Vanderbilt, I'm sorry you got left out. Notre Dame, sorry. But you weren't real national title contenders anyway. And we shouldn't expand the playoffs so that you guys can be in next time. Because then we'd be having a ridiculous conversation about Michigan in a 16-team playoff. All right. So, that's the playoff field. I think that Oregon has the best path to the national championship. They're going to have to navigate travel issues. That's going to be a real issue for them. The second big issue for them, and I've talked about this quite a bit over the past few weeks, is the injuries. They've had quite a few injuries over the past 2 months. And namely, like, Poncho has been banged up a little bit. He played against Washington. He didn't play his best game. He looked injured, but he played. I've got no doubt that he's going to be playing against James Madison, and he's going to be healed up. There have been other injuries like Isaiah World and Alex Harkey, but the big injuries that we're all thinking about are Gary Bryant Jr., DeCorian Moore, and Evan Stewart. And over the past 2 months, my tone has sort of shifted from concerned, a little bit concerned, to very concerned. In my last episode, I talked about how I'm very concerned about the injuries in the wide receiver room. And if Oregon had the 8 seed, then I think they would be in a pretty bad spot with the way that the injuries have gone. However, they caught a break. They get a tune-up game against James Madison University. And they'll be able to work in some of these guys, get them warmed up, get the rust knocked off, going into that Texas Tech game. I don't think that is a reasonable expectation for Evan Stewart. I talked about it on I've talked about this a lot. I think that Evan Stewart needs multiple games to get back to performance. There's a difference between return to play and return to performance. And Evan Stewart, if he plays against James Madison, he will have returned to play, but he will not have returned to performance. He's been out for a calendar year. He hasn't played a game since January 1st. If he plays against James Madison, he's not just going to knock all the rust off and get himself back into football shape. You have to play your way multiple weeks in games to get back into football shape. Evan Stewart is not going to be able to do that by the time they play Texas Tech or even in the semifinal. That's just not a reasonable expectation, and it's unfair to expect that kind of performance from him. It is reasonable, however, for Gary Bryant Jr. and DeCorian Moore. I would be very, very concerned about both of them if they did not play in this James Madison game. Quite frankly, if the initial reports after DeCorian Moore's injury was an ACL, and that was quickly swept under the rug, and Dan Lanning just said that it was a knee tweak and it's not going to end his season. If he doesn't play against James Madison, that will mean he's been out for over 2 months from a quote-unquote knee tweak. And that sounds fishy to me. If you're out for 2 months, then you've probably sustained a serious injury. So my mind would actually go back to the ACL if DeCorian Moore can't play against James Madison. If he does play, then that gives him the opportunity to get the rust off, to get back into game shape, run some routes again against real competition, and be close to his normal performance going into Texas Tech. I don't think that Evan Stewart being out for a calendar year is going to take more time to get back to his performance than DeCorian Moore, who's been out for 2 months. DeCorian Moore, he probably only needs 1, maybe 2 games to get back to being who he is. So I think that the James Madison game is a great spot to get him back in, get him some reps, and have DeCorian Moore return to performance by the Texas Tech game, if that makes sense. He'll return to play against JMU. He'll return to performance against Texas Tech. That's sort of where my head's at and what I'm expecting with DeCorian Moore and Gary Bryant Jr. Gary Bryant, he went out against Iowa with an ankle injury. My hunch is just that was a high ankle sprain. Those usually take 4 to 6 weeks to heal from. He should be back for James Madison. I would be very surprised if he wasn't, and frankly, I wouldn't know what other injury he could have possibly had to his ankle to be out for more time than James Madison. I really don't know what could cause him to miss more time in the ankle, if that makes sense. So that's the injury situation. I think there's a pretty good shot that all 3 guys are back, but at the very least, I think that Gary Bryant Jr. and DeCorian Moore are needed back. Evan Stewart would be a nice to have. Gary Bryant and DeCorian Moore are need to have. Evan Stewart is a nice to have at this point. Just because I don't think he's going to be himself again for the remainder of this season. So that's what I think about the injury situation. Now let's talk big picture. I did a podcast right at the very beginning of the year, right after Evan Stewart's injury actually, where I laid out my expectations for Oregon's season. And my expectation was for Oregon to make the college football playoff. I didn't think that they would be I didn't think that they would be in the national championship conversation. And frankly, they have exceeded my expectations. They've gone 11-1. I expected them to be either 10-2 or 11-1, so they got to 11-1. They're the 5 seed. I still maintain that their best win is against Penn State. Some people might say that it's against USC, but I still maintain their best win was in Happy Valley. That was a big moment for Oregon. That was when my expectations sort of raised a little bit. I shouldn't say that. That's when I got my hopes up. Like, I've had my hopes up ever since Oregon beat Penn State in Happy Valley. And I know that Penn State has gone off the deep end since then, but they were a really good team. They're not the same team right now. They don't have Drew Aller anymore. They don't have James Franklin anymore. And they lost Tony Rojas. So what we're seeing right now out of Penn State is completely different than what Oregon saw on that day. So I maintain that that's their best win. That's when I got my hopes up. Their only loss is to the number 1 team in the country. I've been banging the drum for multiple weeks that I feel very, very good about an Oregon-Indiana rematch if that happens in the semifinal. I know they're a really good team. I know they just beat Ohio State. If Oregon can get past Texas Tech, I think that they've got a really good shot against Indiana in the semifinal. I think that that's a favorable matchup, and I think that the emotional factor goes into that game as well. So I would hope that Oregon's path to the national championship is Oregon or James Madison, Texas Tech, Indiana, national championship. So back to big picture, I think that they have met expectations for the year, even if they were to lose to Texas Tech. And they've secured another really good recruiting class, number 2 in the nation. They didn't quite get Chris Henry Jr., but they did get Jalen Lott, another 5-star. They got Gatlin Bear, another 5-star. So they brought in 2 5-star wide receivers. They are losing both coordinators. I almost forgot to talk about the coordinators. So let's throw that in real quick. All right. So Drew Merringer announced his offensive coordinator. Chris Hampton announced his defensive coordinator. Last week I talked about how I expected Chris Hampton to be the defensive coordinator. He has been the co-defensive coordinator for a while now at Oregon. And it was always obvious that he was the heir apparent. And it's such a good fit. He's been in the program. He's been learning from Tosh Lupoi. And he just won Recruiter of the Year last year, bringing in that defensive backhaul. So I have no issues with the Chris Hampton hire, Chris Hampton promotion. What puzzles me is the Drew Merringer promotion. He's been the tight ends coach, and we've gotten some very good play from the tight ends over the past couple of years. And there's no doubt in my mind that he can be good. I fully expect Drew Merringer to be a good offensive coordinator. He's learned from Will Stein. over the past few years. And he's the only coach on the offensive side of the ball that has had experience calling plays before. So Drew Maringer did that for a season in the past. What my problem is my standard for Oregon's program over the next few years is not to be good. It's not even to be great. My standard for Oregon's program is to win a national championship. We're reminded over and over all the time, just about every day on Twitter, from USC fans and Washington fans and Ohio State fans and anyone, that we don't have any national championships in our history. And the team last year was good enough. The issue is that they got outcoached by Ohio State thoroughly. The team a couple years ago in 2023 with Bo Nix, they were good enough to win a national championship that year. Dan Lanning and his staff was outcoached by Kalen DeBoer. So you need coaches who are good enough to win national championships. Can Drew Maringer do that? Frankly, I don't know. I would guess that he can be a really good coordinator. I don't know if he can be a national championship good coordinator. And you look at what Ohio State has done over the past few years, they've gotten NFL guys in their building to do the coordinating. This year it's Matt Patricia, who has the best defense in college football. They're the number one defense in college football. Last year they were number one. This year they're even better with Matt Patricia calling the plays. And was he a good NFL coordinator? No. But he's great at the college level. The year before that, they had Chip Kelly calling their plays offensively. Is he a good coordinator in the NFL? No. But he was great at the college level. We know that. And they won a national championship 2 years in a row with NFL guys. And I look at Oregon's coordinator position. You can pick either one. Oregon is getting top 5 recruiting classes every single year. And they're finishing really high in the rankings every single year. Their coordinators, every single coordinator that Dan Lanning has had, has gotten a job at the Power 4 level. So those are two very attractive destinations. Like if you're a coach who wants to get a promotion, then you do everything you can to get that Oregon job, either the defensive coordinator or the offensive coordinator job. So for the defensive coordinator, I was fine with Chris Hampton. For offensive coordinator, I would have liked to see them go big game hunting. I would have liked to see them go not necessarily after Chip Kelly. I know that was popular. I think that you leave that in the past. You just move on. But I think that you could have gotten someone who had a little more experience, who had some. I just think you could have gotten a really good coordinator, someone who was capable of leading you to a national championship. And, you know, Dan Lanning, he hasn't gotten a coordinator hire wrong. So that's a really good reason to trust him and to trust his process. And he knows exactly who's in the building. He communicates with them every day. So you can say trust Dan Lanning. I just say I'll trust him unconditionally when I see national championships. I'll trust Ryan Day unconditionally. I'll trust Nick Saban unconditionally. I'll trust Kirby Smart unconditionally. But with Dan Lanning, I need to see a little bit more before I can say that. So that's where I stand on the coordinator hires, is I would have liked to see a little more with the offensive coordinator. Perfectly fine with the DC, but with offensive coordinator, I think you left a little bit of meat on the bone. So that's going to do it for today. Leave a comment below. Tell me what exactly you think of the offensive and defensive coordinator positions. I'm genuinely curious. I'm not just doing this for engagement. I do actually want to learn from you guys. I'm willing to change positions if I hear an argument that I agree with. So leave your comments down below. That's going to do it for our show today. We're going to have another episode later this week, so please stay tuned, be watching for that, and I hope you guys have a wonderful day.